After a lot of changes over in Vegas, let's see how the Knights will look heading into this season. What's going on, guys? Jay Hoyt back with you today. Welcome back to NHL 25. I gotta get used to saying that. We are back here with some online gameplay for you. And we're back, right? We're talking about which side is it. The Vegas Golden Knights trying to return back to that Stanley Cup and trying to get back to lifting that trophy. And this offseason was actually a big change for Vegas, right? They had a lot of players leave. If I'm counting correctly, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 players that I counted that are somewhat significant. So I'm not really counting like any full-time AHL players. So there's probably a few in there, but for the most part, there's 9 players that moved on, whether it was through trades, whether it was through signing with a new team, whether it was waivers, whatever it may be. There's lots of changes here with the Knights. So first and foremost, of course, we know Jonathan Marchessault signed a 5-year contract with Nashville. Obviously, one of the staples of the Knights, getting to the Stanley Cup, making a big run, becoming the Golden Misfits, and kind of headlining that, this team for so long and being that, number one, one of the top 3 guys on the team. And then he ended up moving on this offseason. So that's going to be a massive loss. And of course, we'll get to what they added here in a couple of minutes here. But the second thing, right? Chandler Stevenson, another player that, we had assumed one of these guys would go, whether it was Marchessault or Stevenson. We were hoping that one of those guys would stay. However, he does sign a big contract over with the Seattle Kraken. You had Anthony Mantha, a late season acquisition from the trade deadline, who signed with Calgary. Then you had bottom 6 William Carrier signing with Carolina. Another bottom 6 guy, Mike Amadio, signing with Ottawa. Both, I think, 6-year deals. Just absolutely insane. Then you have Paul Cotter, who was involved with a trade, which we'll talk about in a little bit as well, to New Jersey. You have Alex Martinez starting with a defenseman who signed with the Chicago Blackhawks. Then you have Logan Thompson, one of their goaltenders from last year, traded to the Washington Capitals, as well as one of the other, I guess I'll say, depth goaltenders, Yuri Patera. He did sign with the Vancouver Canucks. So, we kind of predicted it, right? Most of these guys would probably end up moving on. But I was really anticipating some of these guys actually sticking around. But, in the case of Marchessault, it kind of came down to term on his deal, which, again, like we've talked about in the one video that we specifically talked about Marchessault, that if 1 year was really the deal breaker, then, I don't even know what to tell you. Because, it wouldn't be that big of a deal for me, especially given, how late you are in your career. Stevenson, we kind of predicted him leaving just because money's tight, right? Plain and simple, money is tight. Couldn't afford everybody, but Stevenson, though, makes out big. He signs a big contract, 7 years, what was $56 million or whatever it was, over with Seattle. He instantly becomes one of their better, I'll say one of their best players. Then you have Anthony Mantha, who kind of had to prove it at the end of the year of, if you don't prove that you can stick around here, then you're probably going to end up walking. Or if they got him for cheap enough, which I don't remember what the contract he signed was, but it was $2 or $3 million. So, a little bit under what he made before, not actually half of what he made before. So I'm not surprised with him signing. Will Carrier, kind of surprising, right? He was one of those just locker room community guys that, did the dirty work. But 6 years at what was $2 million is absolutely insane for a fourth liner. So maybe they anticipate him having a bigger role there. I'm not sure, but yeah, I'm glad they didn't match that contract because that would have been terrible. Mike Amadio, same thing. I think his was 4 or 6 or 5 or something kind of decent term deal with Ottawa, which again, just why? I don't understand. He's a third liner at best, and I don't know why you do that. Alex Martinez, we talked about it, right? They were not going to afford him at, the $5 or $4 million. I think he ended up signing with $4.5 million. But Chicago, a rebuilding team that has lots of money to throw around, they kind of get a year or two maybe out of him, and then he's probably going to end up retiring or, filling in on another team, maybe a Stanley Cup contending team. as a third line guy or, lower, bottom four guy. But he signs a 1-year deal with Chicago. I think it was 4.5 mil, but they were definitely not going to match that one because, again, they already have 8 or 9 defensemen that could easily fill in to kind of what Martinez's role was. Logan Thompson apparently asked for a trade, so obviously you don't want to hold these players hostage, but he thought he could be a number one guy. He wasn't really going to be a clear-cut number one guy, right? He was going to platoon with Hill, and he wanted to move on. So they traded him over to Washington, I think, for a pair of draft picks. And then Yuri Patera, a depth guy. They ended up getting more depth this offseason. Plus, they have a lot of good young goaltenders that kind of need that time. And Patera was getting, I don't want to say older because he was like 25 or 26 or somewhere in that range of like mid to late 20s. Which at that point, like, if you're not consistently in the NHL, like, you probably need to move on from your current team and just find a different, change of scenery to play in. So, he moved on. Actually, he moved back and forth. He was with Vancouver, then he got claimed off waivers, but I think it was Boston. Then got put on waivers again, and then Vancouver got him back, if I remember correctly. But, Patera wasn't really that big of a loss, but, still, just wanted to, add it in here. But then we get into the additions, where I'm a little bit disappointed with what we got and what we did or didn't do, and of course, we'll get into all of that in here. But they did acquire Alexander Holtz and Akira Schmid from New Jersey in exchange for Paul Cotter, which I realized we kind of looked right over, but he got traded over to New Jersey. Kind of similar role as he was in Vegas, just bottom six, guy that kind of just filling in wherever. And he actually had a pretty good preseason, if I remember correctly. But, Holtz and Schmid from New Jersey in exchange for Cotter, and I think it was a third-round draft pick, if I remember correctly. So, in my opinion, this was a great trade. Getting Alexander Holtz, a former 7th overall draft pick in 2020, as a young player, still just 21, 22 years old, that still has a lot of potential upside, and a lot of offensive upside as well. He's playing on the fourth line for the most part in New Jersey, so definitely a change of scenery and, an upgraded role definitely, I think, will benefit him. And it's one of those players that you always see in NHL, or at least on franchise mode, that usually gets pretty good. Now, obviously, you can't judge that too much on, the NHL, video games franchise potential system. But still, I think he still has a lot of potential upside. And, given where he kind of fits in this team, I think he'll be a great addition to the roster. Akira Schmid did kind of had a chance to, break into training camp, or preseason, I should say, as the backup / third goaltender. But, given that they signed Samsonov, and he actually has a pretty good track record, it was pretty clear cut who the two guys were going to be in the NHL. But still, Schmid, young, and will be that number one guy in Henderson in the AHL, and will be the first guy called up, whenever they need a goaltender for whatever reason. But then, losing some scoring, but also gaining some scoring. With the addition of Holtz, they also get Victor Olofsson, previously of the Buffalo Sabres. I think he actually bounced around a little bit, if I remember, or maybe I'm mistaken him for somebody else. But Olofsson has former chemistry with Jack Eichel, so that will be cool. Hopefully those guys will, benefit off each other and bring back that chemistry and get Olofsson back to, a legitimate scorer, which would be really nice. Then you also have Tanner Pearson, who came to camp on a PTO, professional tryout, for those that don't know what those mean. Then he ended up earning himself a 1-year contract. I think it was like 1 year, 2-way, for like a league minimum, like $775K. So that's awesome. He'll be a veteran, do all the dirty work, penalty kill type guy on the bottom six. And then also you have something that they just did, I think yesterday or the day before, a few days ago as you guys are watching this, is actually claimed Raphael Lavoie from the Edmonton Oilers. I'm not too familiar with him, but apparently, given off what his kind of elite prospects page is, younger player that has some potential upside and has been doing pretty well in the AHL. So again, should be one of those do well in the AHL and potentially earn yourself a call up, as well as Cole. Is it Schmidt? I'm not. It's like Schmidt, but something else spelled a little differently. So I'm not exactly sure how to say it. I don't know if I've ever actually heard of this player. I've seen it in franchise mode a couple of times. I know we got him a couple of years ago, but didn't really know who he was. Still don't know who he is. But they claimed him from Calgary. And then something I was actually super excited about was they did sign Zach Austin Reese, which is something I was really going to bring up since they lost him already. But Austin Reese was a guy that almost was going to fill in that Tanner Pearson role, right? Bottom six, penalty kill, do all the dirty work type, fourth line, rotation guy. He actually gets put on waivers to get sent down to the AHL, and the Columbus Blue Jackets ended up claiming him, and now he is with them. But as far as the projected lineup goes, I kind of based it off the last preseason game. But of course, William Karlsson right now is out with an injury, so lines are a little bit different from what they look like from the last game. So of course, until he gets back, things are going to be a little shuffled up. But even if it stays with kind of how I'm predicting here, I'm pretty happy with the lines, honestly. Like, we'll get to it in a second. So projected lines of Olofsson, Eichel, and Stone, and then having Dorofeev with Hurdle and Holtz, and then having Barbashev, Karlsson, and Waugh, as well as Pearson, Howden, and Kolesar, with Schwitt as the rotation 13th forward, as well as on defense you have Theodore McNabb, Hannafin, Pietrangelo, Haig, Whitecloud, and then you have Hutton and Korzak. So Korzak, one of those players I'd love to see some more from this year. Obviously younger player, right-handed shot defenseman. Would like to see him get more playing time, but of course, being a rotation guy, I'm not really sure, who they're going to kind of rotate him in with. I don't know if it's going to kind of be the third line of like Haig and Whitecloud. They kind of every few games they kind of rotate a guy, in or out or whatever it is. But if he's not going to play, I really wish they would have, sent him down so he would get a lot of game time. But, I guess we'll see, right? Obviously we have some aging defensemen here and some players that I'm really surprised they didn't get rid of. But other than that, we have the goaltenders Hill and Samsonov. That's kind of no question of who's the number one guy there. Samsonov, though, does have a really good track record. So it should be pretty good, I don't want to say battle, but healthy competition at least for the goaltender spot between the pipes. So I guess I'll talk about just kind of the recap of the offseason. So we lost a lot of players. Obviously, we mentioned a lot of those players where they went to, and I'll say limited players they did get back. And they didn't really get, as much as I was hoping to get back out of free agency or trades or anything else, especially given that they have a little bit of money left, but still, like they, can't spend every single penny. I mean, I guess they could, but they still have a decent team, right? They have some players that are looking for bigger roles this year, and instead of signing one of those players that can fill that role, it looks like they kind of promoted from within. So it looks like they're going to give like Dorofeev a bigger role this year, kind of give him some free space and let him play in the NHL, as well as Waugh, projected as a third line centerman, but with Karlsson probably where he's going to end up fitting, or maybe on the second line, and Hurdle's going to drop down. I'm not really sure, how all those guys are going to, fit together. But I do kind of like that the Barbashev, Karlsson, Waugh line. That's a really good, defensive, but still has some, offensive touch to it. Or maybe it'll switch around once, Karlsson does get back, and everything will change. I'm not exactly sure, because obviously Karlsson, big piece for Vegas. Whether you want to call him a middle six centerman or a second line center, third line center. I don't know what you want to consider them, because they kind of roll all of their four lines equally. So it's really hard to be like, no, that's the second line center, that's the third line. Like, it's really hard to do that. So I'm kind of disappointed on the fact that they didn't get, enough back to replace a Stevenson or Marchessault, or even have the depth with, Carrier or Cotter or Amadio. But again, you still have the guys that can get those bigger roles. So I do understand it to an extent. And then defensively, pretty much have the same exact crew as last year, just without Martinez. And you add in Hannafin, who came in obviously later on. So I'd still like them to get rid of Haig. Personally, I just don't really like the way he plays. He's just big, awkward, and I just feel like if you put Hutton in there, he's going to be just as good, or put Korzak in there, he's going to be just as good. So, I don't know. We'll have to see there. Goaltenders obviously replacing Thompson with a guy that I think will be a great addition to the squad and should provide some valuable wins for the team. And hopefully, this whole team and all these new guys with their new roles all gel really well together, and we have lots of success this year. But that's going to do it for today's video. Wanted to recap a little bit of the offseason, especially given that the NHL, I think, starts, what, tonight or already did or something like that. So lots to look forward to this upcoming season. Make sure you stay tuned. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. And as always, guys, we'll see you